Hi everyone, I'm Martin Castine, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to talk about a subject which has been on my mind for a little while. Classic cameras and a unique look to the files that it puts out. Right, so here's the thing. Look, cameras have gone way past the point of what we actually need. They surpassed that a long time ago. We've got enough megapixels, we've got enough ISO performance, we've got enough autofocus performance. Everything else on top of that is making our lives easier. There's no question about that, and I don't debate any of that or have any problems with it. But the thing that bugs me with digital cameras and the kind of way that we pursue them as photographers is that we value the things that make our lives easier. Our lives are already really easy with digital. Adding on more layers to make it even easier is really nice to have, but I will always pick a camera whose output is superior because it looks better than another camera who just makes my life easier. When I look at a camera, when I buy a new camera, I already know that it's going to be easy to use and that it's going to have loads of functions and settings and stuff that are going to benefit me. I don't doubt any of that, and I've got no problem with any of that. But what I want to know is, what do the files look like? When I press the shutter button and all of those fancy features have been engaged, what am I actually going to get back? And at what point is the tipping point where I say, yes, that makes my life easier, but I don't like what it does. Or at least I should say, I prefer what something else does instead. And then you have that weighing up of, do I go for that other camera that gives me that look, or do I go for the ease of use? You can choose when you use that, and you can say, right, for this project, this will work and I can get away with using this. But you might say on another one, look, this is going to be kind of hard. So an example of that would be, let's say you're going to photograph a wedding. Now, I've shot weddings on the 5D Classic. Now, the 5D Classic happens to be called Classic, and I'm using that as a reference point because I'm going to talk about a few other cameras that I consider to be classics as well. I've shot weddings on the 5D Classic, the 5D Mark I, but it's definitely not the easiest camera to do that on because of the ISO performance and the autofocus. Okay, you could look at something like a 5D2, 3 or 4 or any of the new R series cameras are going to make your life easier at a wedding. And when you're shooting a wedding, your primary concern is that you give decent quality photos back to your customer. And I think that's the right thing to do. It's probably the right choice. So that's why for me, I will always favour things. My camera for weddings was the D600, and I'm going to get into that in a moment as well, cameras like that. The usability and the stability and the safety of using certain cameras is always going to be important. Let me give you an example. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the D600 here. I consider, amongst Nikon, the cameras that I've used, the D700 and the D600 to be what I would consider classic cameras because of the files they put out. Now, the D600 sensor is used in the D600, the D750, the D4 probably, and then the DF I expect. Maybe other cameras as well, but that probably even in the Z6, it's probably basically the same sensor, or maybe it's been modified slightly. But you need to understand that when the camera manufacturer has a sensor, you get the sensor and then the raw file that comes out of it is having stuff done to it. We don't like to think of that, and we like the idea that the word raw means that there's nothing done to that file, and that's just not true. The camera still on the raw file applies noise reduction, sharpening, applies a color palette to it, and probably a bunch of other stuff as well. This is why on some cameras, when you get up to higher ISOs, you can start to see some smudging from noise reduction in the raw files, not in the JPEGs, I mean in the raw files. So the D600 for me was the camera that I was using mostly for weddings, and when I used it, I thought that the skin tones, when you edit the file, come out really well, and the tonal gradations look very nice. I thought that was a great camera, and in terms of usability, yes, it has the clustered focus points in the middle. That doesn't bother me. I can work around that very easily because the focus system works well. Does the D810 system work better? Yes, it does. And I bought the D810 and I didn't like it because I don't like the way the files are coming out of it. And so here's kind of my point. I used the D800, the D810, the D750, and whilst all of them are superior camera bodies in every single way other than the files they put out, I prefer the look of the files on the D600. And it's not about ultimate high ISO performance, it's about the shading, right? It's about the kind of tonal gradations, the skin tones that I get out of the camera, and just the overall kind of way the files look. Now, the reason I use the Nikons for weddings is because I really like the way the grain comes out on them. Nikon has this thing when they process the raw files, they kind of take most of the color noise out. So the the green and magenta that you can get in color noise isn't present much on Nikon cameras, where it is a lot more on Canon cameras. And that grain looks more analog when it's not got that noise in there. The tonal gradations you get just look nice and smooth and pretty. Now the colours to me aren't as good as Canon. I think that the main point though is that was a good mix of different features that was good for shooting weddings on. Whilst I really love the output from that camera, I can live with the negativities of the bunched focus points. Right? And people said the oil thing, but that went away really quickly. Very few cameras make it to what I call that classic status, but I'm going to talk about a few of them. The thing that strikes me with camera manufacturers is that the first generation, or the first model I should say, of a new generation of cameras tends to be the one where they put effort into the way the files come out. Then after that, they kind of ditch that and they go for improvements in the other stuff, all the kind of stuff that looks good on a spec sheet, and some real world usability improvements. There's no doubt about that. But when you look at the 5D Mark I, the D600, the D700, the Fuji X Pro 1, I tell you what, if you shoot Fuji, I defy you to tell me that the pictures look better from any other Fuji X series camera than the Fuji X Pro 1. If you like the look of Fuji, the X Pro 1 is where it's at, and that camera is not the easiest camera to use. In terms of actually using a camera, it's my favorite camera that I've ever used. And I remember having a conversation with a photographer once, and he said to me, "What's your favorite camera of all time?" And I said, "What do you mean in terms of like the files it puts out, or the actual way the camera is used?" Now, if we're talking about the way the files come out, it's the 5D Classic. If you're talking about the way the camera handles and how you use it, it's the Fuji X Pro 1. And the Fuji X Pro 1 files are also, for me, in that classic range. I know the camera's not great, right? But it's really nice to use, even though it's difficult. That's so hard to quantify, like what that is, because people find that with cars as well, driving a Trans Am, like Smokey and the Bandit. You remember that kind of stuff. You know that that car's probably rubbish to drive, right? But you'd probably love every minute of it. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of the handling. Cameras that I consider classic, the output of it, the roar from the engine, if that is really good too and special and unique, then you've got a classic camera on your hands. So from Canon, I would class the 5D Mark I and the 5D Mark II. I'm going to give it to the 5D Mark II because I think they've achieved it with that. But if you've got suggestions, I'd like to hear that in the comments. From Nikon, I'm going to give it to D700 and the D600. Perhaps the D4. I haven't really used the D4. I borrowed one for like a few minutes to try it, and I have been really impressed with the files that I've seen. So maybe you've used that and maybe you think that too. But if you've got any other ideas from Nikon, I don't include the 800, although it's probably the best value for money camera on the market right now. Used the 800. I definitely don't include the D810, even though it is, in terms of using it, a brilliant camera. Not mad on the files that it puts out. Sony, maybe the first A7R, and I don't think anything since, although they make brilliant cameras, there's just no question. But for me, everything from them is all about specs and features, which is great in a way, because they're pushing the market forwards, they're pushing the envelope, and they're leading the industry in that area. And that's only a good thing for everyone involved. And I really like Sony. I think they're making really, really good cameras. But in terms of classic, the kind of look that comes out of them, I think maybe the first A7 and the A7R which is again the sensor from the D600 and the D800. I think those two could fit into that, although the colors are a bit funky. That's the only thing, but the rendering was really nice from them. And for Fuji, it's the X Pro 1, and for me, nothing else since, really. So every time the cameras are Canon 6D Mark 1, definitely the 6D Mark 1. The 6D Mark 1 is, for me, has to be a classic. God, why didn't I think of that before? I can't believe I kind of missed that out. The 6D Mark 1, definitely. That's absolutely, and that really, the 6D Mark 1 is an interesting camera because it kind of ticks loads of boxes. It competes really highly with the D600, produces arguably better files than it, definitely in terms of color, not necessarily quite in terms of rendering, but it's right up there. I think the 6D Mark 1 as well. So you have to pick and choose like when you think something's going to be the right tool for the job. Sometimes it's not always about having the luxury of the best kind of nicest feel of image coming out of the camera. Sometimes it's more about, look, I need to get this job done, and the overall result is not going to be too different anyway. So that's when you need to choose those things. I'd like to hear from you what you think, in your experience, cameras that you've used have that rendering. I don't care about technical stuff, yeah? I don't want to know about, oh, I shot this at 12,800 ISO. No one cares about stuff like that. Like, no one cares. It's just not interesting. I want to know what looks good, right? Tell me about the cameras that you've used. Give me stuff that maybe I've never heard of, or different manufacturers and stuff and so on. Tell me what you think looks really good. And maybe we're going to do one on lenses for this as well, because I think that's an important one to do. So this one's on camera sensors. If you want to catch the one on lenses as well, remember to subscribe to the channel. And if you enjoy this, give me a thumbs up. Drop me some comments, guys. I'm going to reply to them. So, give me some comments, and I'll catch you next video. Bye-bye.